In the autumn of 1922, Swedish military command authorized a topographic survey 40 kilometers into the northern wilderness. 8 Royal Engineers, 3 weeks of mapping terrain for defensive fortifications, standard operation. But the forest had older claims than Swedish sovereignty. And when the survey stakes started moving on their own, Lieutenant Lindström's team learned that some borders were drawn long before humans invented maps. This is the classified report they were ordered never to discuss. The spruce forest stood in perfect military formation, 20 meters tall and packed so tight you couldn't see 30 yards in any direction. Lieutenant Johan Lindström stepped off the supply truck into 2 inches of October snow, the kind that hadn't decided whether to commit or melt away by noon. The clearing they'd carved out for the survey camp looked like a wound in the tree line, raw stumps, scattered sawdust already freezing into the mud, 6 canvas tents arranged in regulation spacing around a central equipment depot, 40 kilometers from the Boden garrison. No roads worth the name. Just logging tracks that turned to soup when it rained and iron when it froze. I'd drawn the short straw for this one. Royal Engineers, they said. Essential topographic work for the Northern Defense Reorganization. 3 weeks in the wilderness with a survey team, mapping terrain for a military line that probably wouldn't get built for another decade. The Great War had been over 4 years, but Stockholm was still jumping at shadows, still convinced the Russians might come pouring over the border if we didn't have proper fortifications sketched out on paper. So here I was, 26 years old with an engineering degree from Uppsala, and enough field experience to know this assignment was punishment duty, dressed up as important work. Sergeant Eric Svensson had the camp operational before I'd finished my first inspection. 8 years in the Engineers, the man could build a functional latrine in a blizzard and have it properly documented in triplicate. Perimeter stakes are set at 50 meters, sir, he reported, breath fogging in the cold. Generators running clean. Water detail found a stream 200 meters northeast, good flow. Conscripts are bitching about the cold, but that's standard. How many locals did we get? Just the one. Private Pedersen. Grew up in Arvidsjaur, knows the forest. Svensson pulled out a hand-rolled cigarette, didn't light it yet. Says his grandfather worked these logging camps. Also says we shouldn't be here. That got my attention. Superstition? Didn't specify. Just said the old loggers avoided this valley. Something about the stones. He gestured vaguely toward the eastern tree line, where a series of moss-covered boulders jutted from the undergrowth like broken teeth. I told him we're Swedish military engineers, not village idiots afraid of rocks. I let it pass. Every survey mission had its ghost stories. The surveying equipment came off the second truck in wooden crates marked with Royal Arsenal stamps, theodolites, measuring chains, leveling rods, all of it precision German craftsmanship we'd acquired as war reparations. Corporal Anders Bergman supervised the radio setup, stringing antenna wire between 2 tall pines. The wireless set was new, one of the Marconi field units. We were supposed to check in with Boden Garrison every evening at 1800 hours. The first 3 days were textbook. We ran survey lines through the forest in 8-hour shifts, measured elevations, recorded drainage patterns. The terrain was bastard difficult, steep ravines cutting through dense conifer stands, granite outcroppings that threw off our magnetic readings, bogs that looked solid until you stepped wrong. Private Pedersen guided us around the worst of it, moving through the undergrowth with the easy confidence of someone who'd grown up hunting these woods. On the 4th night, someone moved our survey stakes. I found them at first light when I went to check our baseline measurements. 20 wooden stakes we'd driven into the ground along a 500-meter transect, each one marked with paint and carefully recorded in our field books. Every single one had been pulled up and relocated exactly 3 meters to the north, replanted with enough force to drive them a foot deep into the frozen earth. Svensson crouched beside one of the displaced stakes, running his thumb over the wood. No tool marks. Someone grabbed these bare-handed and shoved them straight down through frozen ground. He looked up at me. You know how much force that takes? I knew. I'd watched two privates struggle with a mallet and steel spike for 10 minutes to get the originals planted. Practical joke? Not from my men. His voice had gone flat, the tone he used when he was about to suggest something he didn't like. Sir, I've got 8 soldiers in this camp. I know where every one of them was last night. We ran 2-man sentry rotations. Nobody left their post. We gathered the survey team after breakfast. Corporal Bergman confirmed the radio check with Bowden had gone through on schedule. No requests for assistance, no reports of unauthorized personnel in the area. Private Lars Ekström, our medic, suggested wildlife. Bears, maybe, or elk rutting against the stakes. Bears don't replant stakes in parallel formation, Svensson said, and they don't do it quietly enough that sentries 30 meters away don't hear anything. Private Pettersson stood at the edge of the group, not quite looking at the displaced stakes. My grandfather said the Skogsrå doesn't like surveying, doesn't like men marking the forest, claiming it with measurements and maps. The forest woman is a folk tale, I said, keeping my voice level. We're not stopping a military operation because of logging camp superstition. That night I doubled the sentries and had them patrol in pairs with electric torches. Nothing happened. The night after that, someone smashed our theodolite. The instrument had been locked in the equipment tent, a canvas structure with a reinforced floor and a padlocked entry flap. When Corporal Bergman opened it, at 0630 hours, he found the theodolite's protective case shattered, the precision optical device inside crushed as thoroughly as if someone had taken a sledgehammer to it. Glass fragments from the lenses glittered across the tent floor. The brass framework was bent into impossible angles. But that wasn't what made Bergman's hands shake when he called me over. The tent showed no signs of forced entry. The padlock was still secure, the canvas walls intact. The destruction had happened from the inside of a locked space, and the sentry rotation logs confirmed 2 men had been positioned within 20 meters of the equipment tent all night. Neither had heard anything unusual. Svensson examined the wreckage with the methodical attention he gave to everything. This isn't vandalism, sir. This is anger. Look at the frame. Metal doesn't bend like that under normal stress. Someone put their full body weight into twisting this thing apart. Someone who got into a locked tent without being seen or heard, I said, and then got back out the same way. Yes, sir. He met my eyes. I'm recommending we post armed guards on all equipment, and I'm recommending we consider abandoning the survey. I should have listened. Instead, I filed a damage report with Bowden Garrison and requested a replacement theodolite. We had a mission. Swedish military engineers didn't retreat because of equipment sabotage, no matter how strange the circumstances. The stones started falling on the 12th night. I was awake in my tent, updating the survey logs by lamplight, when the first impact hit the canvas roof like a cannonball. The whole structure shuddered. Then another strike, and another, a steady bombardment that sent me rolling off my camp bed and grabbing for my sidearm. Outside, someone was screaming, not words, just raw panic. The camp had transformed into chaos. Stones the size of human heads were raining down from the darkness beyond the tree line, arcing over the perimeter and crashing into tents, equipment crates, the frozen mud. Not random, targeted. I watched a rock the size of a hay bale smash directly into the radio tent, collapsing the structure and cutting off Bergman's transmission mid-sentence. "Take cover!" Svensson was shouting, trying to herd the men toward the equipment depot, the only structure with a reinforced roof. "Organized withdrawal! Stay low!" I caught Private Peterson's arm as he sprinted past. "Where's it coming from?" He pointed toward the eastern tree line, where the old moss-covered boulder stood. His face was white. "There. Something's throwing from there." The bombardment lasted 4 minutes. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. We crouched in the darkness, listening to our own breathing, to the settling sounds of damaged equipment, to the drip of something wet that might have been melting snow, or might have been blood. I made the count. 8 men present. No casualties somehow, though Private Ekström had taken a glancing hit to the shoulder that left him nursing bruised ribs. The radio tent was destroyed. The replacement theodolite, which had arrived just that morning, was buried under canvas and shattered crates. And out past the perimeter, something massive was moving through the trees. Svensson had his rifle up before I could give the order. The sentries followed his lead, forming a defensive line facing the tree line. Through the darkness and falling snow, something was displacing the lower branches, not pushing through them like a man would, but moving them aside with the casual efficiency of something that knew these woods better than we ever would. Too tall. That was my first coherent thought. Whatever was out there stood 8, maybe 9 feet high. "Hold fire," I said quietly. "Bergman, get that spotlight working." The corporal fumbled with the portable electric lamp we used for night surveying, his hands shaking badly enough that it took 3 tries to get it aimed. When the beam finally cut through the darkness, it caught something at the edge of the clearing that made my breath stop. A figure, humanoid enough that my mind tried to call it a man, but wrong in every proportion that mattered. Broad shoulders that would have required a doorframe built for moving furniture, arms that hung too long, reaching past where knees should be. The face. Christ. The face was worst of all. Weathered like driftwood, features that might have been carved by someone who'd heard about human anatomy but never quite understood the details. Eyes that reflected the lamplight like an animal's. It was naked despite the freezing temperature, skin the color of river stone, body covered in what looked like moss or lichen growing directly from the flesh. And it was staring at us with an expression I couldn't read, not quite hostile, not quite curious. Evaluating. Private Peterson made a sound low in his throat. Skogsro. Jesus Christ, it's real. The thing tilted its head and I heard wood cracking, not from the creature itself, from the trees behind it. 3 massive spruce were bending, their trunks groaning under some impossible lateral pressure, branches scraping against each other like fingernails on slate. The creature hadn't touched them. It was just standing there, and the forest was responding to its presence like iron filings to a magnet. "Sir?" Svensson's voice was steady, but I could hear the question underneath. "Do we engage?" I was a Swedish military officer with 8 men, standard-issue rifles, and absolutely no training for this scenario. The tactical manual didn't cover folklore come to life. "Illuminate it fully. No sudden movements." Bergman swept the spotlight across the entire figure, and that's when I saw the details that would stay with me. Hands like gnarled roots, each finger as thick as a tent pole, feet that spread flat against the ground, toes digging into the frozen earth with enough force to crack the surface ice. And the texture, the skin wasn't just moss-covered, it was integrated with the plant matter, as if the thing was part tree, part stone, part something else entirely. It took 1 step forward, just one. But that single movement covered 3 meters, and suddenly it was inside what we designated as the restricted zone, the perimeter we'd marked with survey stakes and military authority. "Back up," I ordered. "Maintain formation, fall back to the equipment depot." We retreated in good order, keeping the rifles trained on the creature, even though some part of me knew the Mauser carbines we carried wouldn't do a damn thing against something that could throw boulders like baseballs. The thing watched us go, standing perfectly still now, and I had the horrible sense that it was waiting for something. Permission, maybe, or just the right moment. Inside the depot, Svensson posted guards at the 2 entrances while I tried to think like an engineer instead of a terrified animal. "Bergman, radio status?" "Tents collapsed, sir. Equipment's buried. I'd need 20 minutes to dig it out and another 20 to check for damage." "We don't have 20 minutes. I turned to Pettersson. "Your grandfather's stories. What did they say about these things? Weaknesses? Deterrence?" The private was shaking, not from cold. "The Skogsro guards the forest. It doesn't like men who take without asking. Loggers used to leave offerings. Tobacco, sometimes food. And they never worked the same area too long." He swallowed hard. "My grandfather said there was a crew in 1887 that tried to clear-cut a valley the Skogsro claimed. They found the foreman with his spine twisted backward, still alive. Took him 3 days to die. "We're not loggers," I said. "We're conducting a military survey. We're not taking anything." "We're marking it, sir, claiming it with measurements, to something that's lived here since before Sweden was Sweden. That's the same thing." Outside, the creature had begun to move again. I could hear it circling the depot, heavy footfalls that made the ground vibrate, testing our defenses, learning our position. Private Ekstrom, our medic, spoke up from where he sat nursing his injured shoulder. "Sir, with respect, we need to consider withdrawal. We've got 8 men, limited ammunition, and no way to call for reinforcement. If that thing decides to attack in force..." A boulder hit the depot's north wall hard enough to buckle the reinforced timber frame. Dust and wood splinters rained down. Another impact on the east wall. Then the south. The creature was methodically testing the structure's integrity, and it was doing it with the same rocks we'd used to anchor our tents. "Return fire," Svensson said, not waiting for my order. He cracked open the east entrance and put 3 rounds through the gap, aiming at where the sound suggested the creature was standing. The rifle reports were deafening in the enclosed space. I saw the muzzle flash illuminate Svensson's face, saw him track the target and fire again with professional precision. 6 shots total. Then silence. He pulled back inside, face grim. "Hit it 4 times, center mass. No effect. It's not bleeding, not slowing down. Sir, bullets don't work." I'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made my stomach turn over. We were Swedish military engineers, not monster hunters. Our training covered fortifications, siege warfare, bridging operations. Nothing in the Royal Arsenal Manual addressed enemies that could absorb rifle fire like raindrops. The bombardment intensified, stones hitting the depot roof in a steady rhythm like artillery finding range. Something groaned in the support structure, a beam giving way, or maybe just shifting under the assault. We had maybe 10 minutes before the whole thing came down on our heads. "Offering," I said suddenly. "Pedersen, what exactly did the loggers leave?" "Tobacco was most common, sometimes salt pork or aquavit if they had it." He looked around the depot desperately. "We've got rations, sir. Standard military issue. I don't know if..." "Get them. Everything we have. Svensson, I need you to create a diversion. Draw its attention to the west side while I approach from the east." The sergeant stared at me. "Sir, you're not seriously planning to walk out there and offer it lunch?" "I'm planning to follow the only tactical intelligence we have," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "If tobacco and salt pork kept 19th century loggers alive in these woods, maybe respect and supplies will get us through the night. We tried diplomacy before we tried dying in a collapsed building." It was the stupidest command decision I'd ever made, and I'd spent 6 months in officer training learning all the stupid ways men could get themselves killed. But the alternative was sitting in this depot until the roof caved in or the creature decided to stop playing with us. Svensson didn't argue, which told me how bad he thought our situation was. He just nodded and started organizing the men for covering fire. Pedersen gathered our rations, tinned meat, hardtack, a flask of aquavit from someone's personal supplies. I added my own tobacco pouch to the pile. Through the gaps in the depot walls, I could see the creature's silhouette moving between the trees, waiting. It knew we were trapped. It knew we couldn't hurt it, and it was patient in a way that only immortal things could be. "On my signal," I told Svensson. "Make it count." He gripped my shoulder once, a breach of military protocol that I let pass. Then he was moving, positioning his shooters at the west entrance, checking ammunition, getting ready to create enough noise and light to pull a forest spirit's attention. I took the offerings and moved to the east entrance, heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Outside, the October snow was falling harder now, covering the evidence of our bombardment, burying the survey stakes we'd driven into the earth with such confidence 12 days ago. This was insane. This was court-martial level insanity. "Now," I whispered, Svensson's rifles opened up on the west side with everything they had, controlled bursts, not panic fire, but sustained enough to sound like a full engagement. I slipped through the east entrance while the creature's attention swung toward the noise, moving low and fast across the 20 meters of open ground between the depot and the tree line. The snow was ankle-deep now, muffling my footsteps, and I had maybe 30 seconds before that thing realized the gunfire was a diversion. I placed the offerings at the base of the largest moss-covered boulder, the one Pedersen said the old loggers avoided. Tinned meat, hardtack, tobacco, aquavit. It looked pathetic spread out on the frozen ground, military rations against something that had probably watched glaciers retreat and empires rise. But I arranged them with as much ceremony as I could manage, hands shaking from adrenaline and cold. "We didn't know," I said aloud, feeling like an idiot but pushing through it. "We didn't know this was your territory. We're just surveyors. We'll leave. We'll mark this valley as restricted military zone and we'll leave." The gunfire stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard the creature moving, branches crackling under its weight as it circled back toward my position. I forced myself to stay still, to not run, even though every instinct screamed at me to sprint for the depot. It emerged from the trees 15 meters away, and this close I could see details the lamplight had missed. The moss growing from its skin wasn't random. It formed patterns, spirals, and geometric shapes that reminded me of the rock carvings we'd found in the valley. Ancient marker symbols. The creature wasn't just in the forest. It was of it, maybe older than human settlement in this region, maybe older than the Swedish language itself. It looked at me, then it looked at the offerings, then back at me, and I saw something shift in those reflective eyes, not quite recognition, not quite understanding, but some kind of acknowledgement. It moved forward with that same impossible economy of motion, covering the distance in 2 strides that should have been 5. I held my ground, barely. The creature knelt, and God, watching something that size fold itself down was like watching a building collapse in controlled demolition, and reached for the tobacco pouch with hands that could have crushed my skull like an eggshell. It opened the pouch with surprising delicacy, brought it to its face, inhaled deeply. The sound it made wasn't quite human, wasn't quite animal. Satisfaction, maybe. Or memory. Then it stood, turned, and walked back into the forest. Just like that. No ceremony, no acknowledgement beyond that single moment of acceptance. Within 30 seconds, the sounds of its passage had faded completely, leaving only the whisper of falling snow and my own ragged breathing. I waited 5 full minutes before moving, half convinced it was a trick. But the forest had gone quiet in a different way now. Not the oppressive silence of a predator's hunting ground, but the normal stillness of a winter night. Birds that had been absent for days started calling again. The pressure that had been building in my chest for 12 days suddenly released. When I made it back to the depot, Svensson had the men ready for full withdrawal. "Sir, it's gone." It accepted the offering. I looked at our damaged camp, our destroyed equipment, our completely failed military survey. "We're leaving at first light. Mark this valley as hostile terrain in the reports, restricted for future operations." We broke camp in 4 hours, working through the night by lamplight. Everything that could be salvaged went onto the trucks. Everything that couldn't, the destroyed theodolite, the collapsed radio tent, half our surveying stakes, we left behind. Private Ekstrom treated 3 cases of exposure and 1 sprained ankle from the scramble during the stone bombardment. No combat casualties, no deaths. Against something that could have killed us all without breathing hard, that counted as a victory. The drive back to Boden Garrison took 6 hours over frozen logging roads. Nobody spoke much. Pedersen sat in the back of the truck smoking one of my cigarettes, staring at the forest like he was seeing it for the first time. Bergman had managed to salvage the radio log, but the entries for the last 3 days were going to be a problem. You couldn't write "engaged with hostile folklore entity" in an official Swedish military document. Lieutenant Colonel Anderson met us at the garrison gate, took one look at our condition, and pulled me directly into his office. I gave him the facts as clearly as I could manage on 4 hours of sleep and a nervous system still flooded with combat adrenaline. The displaced survey stakes, the destroyed equipment, the bombardment, the creature. He listened without interrupting, fingers steepled on his desk, face unreadable. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You're telling me a Swedish military survey operation was terminated by a forest troll?" "Sir, I'm telling you we encountered a hostile entity of unknown classification that demonstrated tactical intelligence and capabilities inconsistent with known wildlife. It responded to negotiation protocols and withdrew after receiving traditional deterrent offerings." Anderson pulled out a drawer and withdrew a file folder, leather-bound and stamped with classification markings I didn't recognize. He opened it carefully, turned it so I could see the contents. Survey reports. Dozens of them, dating back to 1887. Different units, different officers, all describing similar incidents in remote northern regions. Stone bombardments, destroyed equipment, massive humanoid figures observed at night. "This valley has been marked as restricted terrain for 35 years, Lieutenant. We send survey teams there every decade or so to see if the situation has changed." He closed the folder. "It never does. The entities perhaps, remain territorial. They tolerate minimal human presence, but respond violently to development activity or extended occupation." "Why?" My voice came out rougher than intended. "Why keep sending men if you know what's there?" "Because part of military intelligence is confirming that anomalies remain stable, that they haven't spread, haven't changed behavior, haven't become more aggressive." He looked at me with something almost like sympathy. "And because the Swedish military operates in a country with a very old history. Sometimes that history is still active." He took my field report, marked it with a classification stamp, and filed it with the others. "Your men will be debriefed individually. They'll be instructed that operational details are classified under national security protocols. Anyone who discusses the specifics of this mission outside official channels will face court-martial." He paused. "This isn't a threat, Lieutenant. It's protection. The public doesn't need to know what lives in those valleys, and you don't need civilian authorities questioning your sanity." I was reassigned to Stockholm 3 weeks later. Fortification design, no field work. Svensson got promoted and transferred to a garrison in the south. The rest of the team scattered to different postings, and I never saw most of them again. But I kept the surveying journal. Against regulations. Probably treasonous, definitely stupid. I kept it because I needed proof that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. On nights when I'm designing bunkers or reviewing fortress plans, I take it out and read through the entries, the careful elevation measurements, the technical descriptions of terrain features. And on the last page, in Svensson's handwriting because my hands were shaking too badly to write clearly. Entity withdrew, following traditional offering protocol. Valley marked for permanent restriction. Recommend no further survey attempts without consultation of regional folklore specialists and authorization from highest command levels. The official record says we abandoned the survey due to impossible terrain and equipment failure. The unofficial truth is filed somewhere in Swedish military intelligence, along with all the other reports of things that shouldn't exist but do. Things that have territorial claims older than our nation and resources we can't fight with rifles or artillery. I'm a Royal Engineer. I build fortifications, plan defensive lines, calculate fields of fire. But I learned something in that valley that no military academy teaches. Some borders aren't ours to draw. Some territories were claimed long before we invented the concept of sovereignty. And sometimes the smartest tactical decision is knowing when to withdraw. The Skogsro is still there. I know because they keep sending survey teams, keep testing whether the situation has changed. It never does. Every decade or so, some lieutenant gets the same assignment I did, makes the same mistakes, learns the same lesson. The forest remembers, and it doesn't forgive trespass. We just got better at recognizing where we're not wanted.